Now we are going to learn about how default arguments in C++ function would work. In the previous example that I have showed you how to create a function, I'm sure that if you have paid the close attention to that example, I have created a function name called void add, and then inside I say that I'm not going to pass any parameter at the moment. So in that case there is no parameter, and then the return type that I have using them there was a void, isn't it? So void means it will return nothing, so meaning there is no return type, only a function name with no parameter. Now I am going to give you an example of how you can use default argument in C++. So before I talk about default arguments, it's very important for you to know what is default argument, right? The default arguments are used when you provide no arguments or only few arguments while calling a function. Let me give you this example so that you will understand what do I mean to say no arguments or only few arguments while calling a function. So here is my main function. Now I am going to create a sub function. So here in this case, let's say I'm going to create a function name called add, the same function name. It's okay. Now the return type that I want to use them here is an integer type. So what does that mean? This time I'm going to return something. The previous example I have used void. Void means it will return nothing. So in this case, this particular function will return an integer data type. That is what it means. So the return type here is an integer. This is the name of the function. Inside, in the previous example, I was not using any parameters, right? But in this example, I'm going to use parameters. So parameters that I want to use them here is, let's say I want to have three parameters: integer, let's say num1, and then another one integer num2, and then I'm going to have another one num3. Even this one is also belongs to integer data type. So now I have parameters for this particular function name called add, and then the return type of this function is integer. So inside this function, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to create another one variable. Let me call this variable as a result. Okay, so this result variable, what is going to have them here is this result will have the addition of num1 plus num2 plus num3. Alright, so this result variable will store the result of the addition of num1, num2 and num3. Now after storing the result into this particular variable name called result, we need to return that result, isn't it? So here, as long as this function is integer return type, so it is going to return something. So I'm going to use the keyword name called return. Why there is a return keyword? Because the return type here is an integer, so as a result is going to return something. So what is it going to return here? The variable result, because this is a variable is having the addition of num1 variable, num2 variable and num3 variable. So here I'm going to have result. Now this result needs to be passed to this particular main program or a main function, because remember, you can have as many as function as possible in your program, but every function needs to be called in the main function. If you don't call the function, for example, now I have the function, I have not called this particular function add into my main function. When I run this one, you see the program has executed, but nothing has been printed, just because I have the function but I have not called the function in the main program. That is the reason why the program is running, but it is giving me an empty result. So for that, what you need to do, you need to call this particular function into this main program. So let me say I'm going to just print. What do you want to print? And then let's say I'm just going to take this function. So what is the name of the function? The function calling, basically we are going to just call the name of the function. Now I'm going to put the semicolon at the end there. Now when I run this one, what do you think? Is it going to run or is it going to give us an error? Let me just run so that we will see what is going to give us. When I run this one, it is giving us an error. What is an error? The error says add was not declared in this scope. So in that case, it's simply telling us to say, no, you have the function name as add and you are trying to call that function here, and then you are trying to print the value of that function, but you know what, that function is not declared in the scope. So what does that mean? You need to declare the function. How to declare the function? I hope you remember. With the return type, the name of the function, inside here you have parameters. So even in this particular function declaration, you need to pass the parameters. So how many parameters do you have them here? You have 3 parameters. All these 3 are integer data type. So just for the sake of time, let me just copy and paste them there and then put a semicolon at the end. So this part is a function declaration. So this is a function declaration. This is a function definition where we have written the logic for that particular function. This is a function calling. Now what do you think? Is it going to run? Let's just check. Again, when you declare the function, it's not necessarily you need to use the exact variable name that you have used them there. Even if you change these things around, instead of num1, let's say you are going to say a value 1, and then this say I'm going to call this one as a value 2, and then this one I'm going to say value 3. Is there anything wrong here? There is nothing wrong. All we are going to do is, yes, I have the function name called integer, I have the function name called add, the return type is integer, it has got the parameters as integer data type. There were 3 parameters. So now I have the integer data type. These are all the variables for this data type integer. You are not allowed to change the data type, remember, because this data type needs to match with this actual function parameter, but you can change the name of the variable. That one is no problem, right? So when I save this one, do you think this program is going to run without an error? It will give us an error. For example, when I run this one, it's giving me an error. Now what is the error? It says too few arguments to function integer add. So it simply says, you know what, we are trying to add the value of num1, num2, num3, and then you are trying to store the result into this result variable, and then you are trying to return that result variable, right? But where is the values for the num1, num2 and num3? In that case, you know what we can do? As I say, that this one is a default argument. So by default, for example, if you want to pass the values, you can pass them here. Let's say 1 for the first num1, 2 for the num2, 3 for the num3. So here this 1 is a value for num1, this 2 is the value for num2, this 3 is the value for this num3. So when I run this one, you will see it is displaying us the result as 6, because we are trying to add 1 plus 2 plus 3. In case, let's say, when it comes to the default arguments, I said the default arguments are used when you provide no arguments or only few arguments while calling the function. This is called function calling, right? Now I have passed 3 values just because I have 3 parameters. What if I pass only 2 parameters? I have 3 variables, but here I have just passed 2 values. So when I run this one, what will happen? It's still going to complain, because you know what? You have 3 variables. So I am expecting you to give me 3 values to add. So in that case, you know what we can do when it comes to the default arguments? So here in the function declaration, we can give the values for this variable. For example, let's say I'm going to give some default value. Let's say this one I'm going to say as 10. For this one I'm going to say as 20. For this one equals I'm going to say 30. Okay. Now in the function declaration, I have given some default values, right? So in case if you don't include 3 values for these 3 parameters, you know what it's going to do? It's going to pick the default values from this function declaration. Now I have got only 2 values. Before it used to complain, you know what, you are missing 1 value. Now when I run this one, you see it is giving me a result as 35. Where is this 35 is coming from? 2 plus 3 is 5, and then for the third argument is taking a 30 as a default, because this one is by default is assigned to the num1 variable. The second value will be assigned to the num2 variable. You know what, for the third variable there is a no value here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to pick the default value from the function declaration. That's the reason why the result was 35. In case, let's say I remove this, right? So for example, as for now we only have 2 values. So this one will for the first one, this one is for the second one. For the third one, we are not supplying any value, so it will go and look from this particular function declaration, even this one has got no value, right? So when I run this one, it's going to give us an error, because this one will be considered for the first one, this one will be considered for the second one, then for the third one it will try to look from the default argument. Even this default argument has got no value. That is the reason why it is giving us an error. So default arguments are used when you provide no arguments or only few arguments while calling a function. So in this case, let's say when I say 30, now I have provided only few arguments, right? So when you provide few arguments, it was too big from here. For example, let's say I'm not going to provide any value. It's just a function calling. I'm not supplying any value. Before it used to give us an error, right? So for example, let me just comment this line out. So when I run this one, it used to complain, you know what, you have the function calling but there is no values. But when you have the default argument, for example for the value 1 equals 10, so in that case, yes, I have not supplied any value here, but I have the function declaration. This function declaration has got the default value. By default, this default values will be picked and then it will be applied for each of these variables that we have them here. So when I run this one, you see the result will be 60, because I have not supplied any value here. So as a result is picking up from the default value. So this is how default arguments work in functions. I hope now this one is making sense. The next one that we are going to learn them is about how to write a recursive function.